Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow morning with the ability to see every human mind as a battlefield. Not metaphorically, but literally a chaotic war zone where thoughts clash like armies, where attention fragments into 1,000 competing factions, where the very essence of who you are dissolves into noise. You watch your colleagues stumble through their days like sleepwalkers, their minds scattered across dozens of apps, notifications, and half-formed intentions. You see friends drowning in their own mental chaos, reaching for their phones every 30 seconds like addicts grasping for a fix they know will never satisfy them. But then you notice something else. In this sea of cognitive carnage, there are a few individuals who move differently. Their minds are not battlefields, they are fortresses. Every thought serves a purpose. Every action cuts through the noise like a blade through silk. While others waste their mental energy on the trivial and the urgent, these rare few focus their entire being on what truly matters. They are not just productive, they are dangerous. Dangerous because they possess something that has become extinct in the modern world: the ability to think clearly, act decisively, and shape reality according to their will. In the next few minutes, we're going to explore Machiavelli's method for achieving absolute mental concentration and how you can use it to boost your focus by 200% or more. By the end of this video, you will not only understand Machiavelli's philosophy, you will have practical steps to apply it in your own life. And I'll tell you this now, the last principle we'll cover is by far the most powerful one, because it will fundamentally change the way you interact with your environment and your own mind. Before we dive deep, make sure you subscribe to this channel, leave a like, and comment below with the biggest challenge you face when it comes to staying focused. Share this video with someone who needs to sharpen their mind, because the insights we're about to uncover could change their life as much as yours. Who are these people? What do they know that you don't? Here's where the story becomes disturbing. These individuals didn't discover some new productivity hack or download a better app. They didn't read a self-help book or attend a seminar. Instead, they learned from someone who lived 500 years ago, a man who operated in a world where a single moment of mental weakness could mean exile, imprisonment, or death. A man who understood that the mind is not just a tool for getting things done, but a weapon for survival itself. That man was Niccolò Machiavelli. But wait, isn't Machiavelli the villain of history? The one who taught princes how to manipulate, deceive, and control? The one whose name became synonymous with ruthless political scheming? Yes, and that's precisely why his method of focus is so devastatingly effective. You see, Machiavelli didn't have the luxury of distraction. In Renaissance Italy, surrounded by enemies, operating in a world of constant political upheaval, he had to develop a system of mental discipline so precise, so unbreakable, that it could function under the most extreme pressure imaginable. While modern focus techniques are designed for comfortable office environments and predictable routines, Machiavelli's method was forged in the furnace of life-or-death decision-making. It's not about managing your time better or organizing your to-do list more efficiently. It's about transforming your mind into an instrument of such clarity and power that distraction becomes literally impossible. But wait, isn't Machiavelli the villain of history? The one who taught princes how to manipulate, deceive, and control? The one whose name became synonymous with ruthless political scheming? Yes, and that's precisely why his method of focus is so devastatingly effective. You see, Machiavelli didn't have the luxury of distraction. In Renaissance Italy, surrounded by enemies, operating in a world of constant political upheaval, he had to develop a system of mental discipline so precise, so unbreakable, that it could function under the most extreme pressure imaginable. While modern focus techniques are designed for comfortable office environments and predictable routines, Machiavelli's method was forged in the furnace of life-or-death decision-making. It's not about managing your time better or organizing your to-do list more efficiently. It's about transforming your mind into an instrument of such clarity and power that distraction becomes literally impossible. Think about that for a moment. What if the reason you struggle with focus isn't because you lack willpower or discipline? What if it's because you're using tools designed for a world that no longer exists, a world where people had the luxury of simple, linear lives? What if the solution isn't to work harder at focusing, but to understand focus as Machiavelli did, as a matter of psychological warfare? This raises a troubling question that cuts to the heart of human existence. If your mind is constantly scattered, if your attention is always divided, if your thoughts are perpetually hijacked by forces beyond your control, then in what sense are you actually living your own life? In what sense are you free? In what sense are you even to you? Machiavelli would argue that a person who cannot control their own attention is not a person at all, but merely a puppet dancing to the whims of external forces. He would say that without the ability to focus your mind like a laser on what matters most, you are not living, you are merely existing, drifting through life, like debris in an ocean of other people's priorities. But here's the paradox that will haunt everything we explore together. The very techniques that can liberate your mind and give you unprecedented focus are the same techniques that history's most controversial figure used to navigate a world of deception, manipulation, and power. To master your attention, you must think like someone who understood that the mind is not just a garden to be cultivated, but a kingdom to be ruled with an iron fist. Are you ready to discover what that means? The reason you can't focus isn't what you think it, Island. It's not your phone, your notifications, or your busy schedule. These are merely symptoms of a far deeper psychological wound, one that has been festering in the human psyche for decades, creating a generation of people who have forgotten what it means to truly think. Carl Jung warned us about this more than half a century ago. He observed that modern civilization was creating what he called the fragmented self human beings, so disconnected from their own inner authority that they become slaves to every external stimulus. Jung saw that when people lose the ability to maintain sustained attention, they lose something far more precious, their capacity for individuation, for becoming who they truly are, rather than what society programs them to be. But Jung was only scratching the surface. The real architect of our attention crisis was identified by Friedrich Nietzsche, who declared that God is dead, not as a theological statement, but as a psychological diagnosis. What Nietzsche understood and what we've forgotten is that when humans lose their connection to transcendent meaning, they become desperate for distraction. Without an organizing principle that gives life direction, the mind becomes a restless animal, constantly seeking stimulation to avoid the terrifying silence of its own emptiness. This is why your focus problems feel so existential. They're not just about productivity, they're about identity itself. Every time you reach for your phone mid-task, every time your mind wanders during an important conversation, every time you find yourself paralyzed by decision fatigue, you're experiencing what philosophers call the anxiety of freedom. You're confronting the overwhelming reality that in a world without clear meaning, you must create your own, and that requires a level of mental discipline most people have never developed. Arthur Schopenhauer understood this paradox brilliantly. He wrote that the human condition oscillates between two poles of misery, want and boredom. When we want something, we suffer from its absence. When we have it, we suffer from emptiness. Modern technology has weaponized this insight, creating infinite scroll feeds that promise to fill the void but only deepen it. Every notification is designed to create artificial want. Every app is engineered to make you crave the next hit of dopamine, the next piece of content, the next temporary escape from the burden of sustained thought. But here's what's truly insidious. This isn't happening by accident. As Aldous Huxley predicted in Brave New World, the most effective tyranny is not one that oppresses people, but one that makes them love their oppression. The fragmentation of human attention serves powerful interests. A scattered mind is a compliant mind. A distracted person is a controllable person. When you can't focus deeply enough to think independently, you become dependent on others to do your thinking for you. Viktor Frankl, writing from the hell of Nazi concentration camps, discovered something that cuts to the heart of our attention crisis. He observed that the prisoners who survived were not necessarily the strongest or smartest, but those who could maintain what he called the last of human freedoms, the ability to choose their response to any situation. But this freedom, Frankl realized, depends entirely on one's capacity for sustained attention. Without the ability to focus your mind deliberately and consistently, you lose the power to choose your thoughts, and therefore your reality. This is the hidden tragedy of modern life. We are surrounded by more information, more opportunities, more stimulation than any generation in human history. Yet we are becoming progressively less capable of the one skill that would allow us to make meaningful use of any of it: the ability to direct our attention with precision and maintain it against all interference. Jean-Paul Sartre would call this bad faith, the human tendency to flee from the responsibility of conscious choice into the comfort of unconscious drift. Every time you tell yourself you can't focus, you're engaging in bad faith. You're pretending that your attention is something that happens to you rather than something you actively control. You're choosing to see yourself as a victim of circumstance rather than as the architect of your own mental experience. The question that haunts everything we've explored so far is this: if the very structure of modern society is designed to fragment your attention, if the most powerful forces in our economy profit from your distraction, if the cultural conditioning of centuries has taught you to flee from sustained thought, then how do you reclaim the sovereignty of your own mind? The answer lies not in fighting the system, but in understanding it so completely that you become immune to its effects. And that understanding begins with recognizing that focus is not a skill, it's an act of rebellion. What you don't realize is that every moment of scattered attention is reshaping your brain at the neurological level. While you think you're just multitasking or staying connected, you're actually participating in the largest uncontrolled experiment on human consciousness in history, and the results are more terrifying than you imagine. Neuroscientist Michael Posner's research reveals that when you constantly switch between tasks, you're not just losing time, you're literally rewiring your neural pathways to crave interruption. Your brain begins to release dopamine not when you complete something meaningful, but when you receive the next notification, the next ping, the next fragment of stimulation. You become addicted to your own mental chaos, mistaking the frantic buzz of constant input for the feeling of being alive. But the consequences go far deeper than addiction. Dr. Daniel Levitin's studies show that chronic multitasking triggers the release of cortisol and adrenaline, stress hormones that fog your thinking and make you feel exhausted even when you haven't accomplished anything significant. Your body exists in a permanent state of low-level panic, as if you're always running from some invisible predator. The predator, it turns out, is your own fragmented attention. Here's what's truly chilling. This process is invisible to you while it's happening. You don't wake up one morning suddenly unable to focus. Instead, your capacity for deep thought erodes gradually, imperceptibly, like a shoreline being worn away by waves. By the time you notice the damage, years of your cognitive potential have already been surrendered to the machine of distraction. The cultural programming runs even deeper than the neurological rewiring. Edward Bernays, the father of public relations and Freud's nephew, understood something about human psychology that would reshape civilization. People can be controlled not through force, but through the manipulation of their unconscious desires. The attention economy that now dominates our lives is built on Bernays' insights, using sophisticated psychological techniques to make you feel that constant connectivity is not just normal, but necessary for social survival. Consider this. When was the last time you sat in complete silence for an hour without any external input? When did you last read a single book from cover to cover without checking your phone? When did you last have a conversation where both people were fully present, not mentally composing their next social media post? If these experiences feel foreign or even anxiety-provoking, you're beginning to understand how completely your natural attention patterns have been colonized by forces that profit from your distraction. The psychological concept of continuous partial attention, identified by researcher Linda Stone, reveals how modern life has trained us to never be fully present anywhere. You're always partially somewhere else, part of your mind monitoring your phone, part of it rehearsing future conversations, part of it replaying past interactions. You live in a state of perpetual cognitive fragmentation, never fully inhabiting any single moment of your existence. This fragmentation doesn't just affect your work, it destroys your capacity for intimacy, creativity, and meaning. When you can't focus deeply on another person, your relationships become shallow. When you can't sustain attention on your creative projects, your work becomes mediocre. When you can't concentrate on your own thoughts and feelings, you lose touch with who you actually are beneath all the noise. The most insidious consequence is what psychologists call attentional residue, the mental fog that persists long after you've switched tasks. Even when you try to focus on something important, part of your consciousness remains stuck in the previous activity. You think you're concentrating on your work, but your brain is still processing fragments of the last video you watched, the last email you read, the last conversation you had. You never experience the crystalline clarity of complete presence. Crystalline clarity of complete presence. But perhaps most disturbing of all is how this attention crisis creates what we might call cognitive learned helplessness. Like laboratory animals who stop trying to escape painful situations after repeated failed attempts, you begin to accept your scattered mental state as inevitable. You tell yourself that deep focus is impossible in the modern world, that constant distraction is just the price of staying relevant, that the ability to think deeply and clearly is a luxury you can't afford. This resignation is precisely what those who profit from your distraction are counting on. The moment you accept that focus is impossible, you become a perfect consumer, impulsive, reactive, and endlessly hungry for the next hit of stimulation that promises to fill the void but only deepens it. What you're really experiencing is the systematic erosion of human agency itself. Without the ability to direct your attention deliberately and sustain it against interference, you lose the power to shape your own experience, to pursue your own goals, to become the person you were meant to be. You become what Machiavelli would have recognized immediately: a subject rather than a ruler, controlled rather than controlling, reactive rather than strategic. The question that should terrify and motivate you in equal measure is this: how much of your life are you actually living? And how much are you simply enduring as a passive observer of your own scattered existence? The rebellion begins with a single, radical recognition. Your attention is not a resource to be managed. It is a kingdom to be ruled. And like any kingdom under siege, it requires not gentle suggestions or positive thinking, but the iron discipline of a sovereign who refuses to negotiate with invaders. This is where Machiavelli's genius becomes apparent. While modern productivity experts treat focus as a pleasant skill to be developed, Machiavelli understood it as a matter of psychological warfare. In Renaissance Italy, a leader who allowed his attention to be captured by the wrong thing at the wrong moment didn't just lose productivity, he lost his life. This created a selection pressure that eliminated anyone who couldn't master what Machiavelli called the discipline of decisive attention. The first weapon in this rebellion is what Machiavelli termed spietata chiarezza, ruthless clarity. This is not the gentle goal-setting advocated by self-help gurus, but a brutal process of elimination that cuts away everything that does not serve your core mission. Machiavelli would begin each day not by making a to-do list, but by identifying the 3 outcomes that, if achieved, would make that day a complete victory. Everything else, no matter how urgent it seemed, was treated as an enemy distraction to be eliminated without mercy. But ruthless clarity is only the beginning. The second principle is what we might call environmental totalitarianism, the absolute control of your physical and digital environment to eliminate temptation before it can arise. Machiavelli understood that willpower is a finite resource, and the wise ruler never relies on what is finite when what is infinite is available. Instead of fighting distractions, you make them impossible. Instead of resisting temptation, you engineer a world where temptation cannot exist. This means more than just turning off notifications. It means creating what Machiavelli would recognize as a fortress of focus, a physical space so completely controlled that your environment itself compels concentration. When you enter this space, your brain knows instinctively that scattered attention is not an option. The walls, the lighting, the tools, the very air you breathe communicate a single message. Here, we think with precision. The third element of rebellion is perhaps the most counterintuitive, strategic withdrawal. While the modern world preaches constant connectivity and always-on availability, Machiavelli practiced deliberate disconnection. He understood that a mind constantly exposed to input becomes reactive rather than strategic, responsive rather than creative. True power comes not from absorbing more information, but from creating the mental space necessary to transform information into wisdom. Machiavelli's own ritual was legendary. Each evening, he would remove his everyday clothes and don formal robes, signaling to his unconscious mind that he was transitioning from the world of trivial concerns to the realm of serious thought. In this sacred space, he would engage with the greatest minds in history through their writings, not as entertainment or casual reading, but as intense intellectual communion. He called this entering the courts of ancient men, a practice that modern neuroscience now recognizes as essential for consolidating learning and developing original insight. But the most radical aspect of Machiavellian focus is the principle of controlled scarcity. While abundance seems like a blessing, Machiavelli recognized it as a curse. When resources, including time, seem unlimited, the human mind becomes careless and undisciplined. When resources are artificially constrained, the mind sharpens like a blade. This is why Machiavelli would deliberately limit his working time, his tools, even his options, creating the psychological pressure that forces peak performance. Consider this. What if, instead of giving yourself all day to complete a project, you gave yourself exactly 90 minutes and made the deadline absolutely non-negotiable? What if instead of having access to all possible research materials, you limited yourself to 3 sources and forced yourself to extract maximum insight from minimal input? This is not limitation. It is liberation from the paralysis of infinite choice. The rebellion also requires what Machiavelli called calculated pressure, the deliberate creation of stakes that make focus inevitable. Without pressure, the mind drifts. Without consequences, attention scatters. By making your goals public, by attaching meaningful rewards and punishments to your focus practice, by creating conditions where failure to concentrate has real costs, you transform focus from an optional skill into a survival necessity. This is not about motivation or inspiration. Those are feelings, and feelings are unreliable. This is about creating structural conditions that make scattered attention literally impossible and focused attention the only viable option. You become like a river channeled between narrow banks. The water has no choice but to flow with tremendous force in a single direction. The ultimate rebellion is the recognition that you are not fighting for better productivity or improved performance. You are fighting for the sovereignty of your own consciousness, for the right to think your own thoughts and pursue your own goals without constant interference from forces that profit from your distraction. This is not self-improvement, it is self-liberation. But there is one final principle that Machiavelli understood, one so profound and dangerous that it has the power to not only transform your focus, but to fundamentally alter your relationship with reality itself. This principle is what I call controlled exposure, and it operates on a level that goes beyond techniques, beyond tactics, beyond everything we've discussed so far. Here is the ultimate truth that will haunt you long after you finish reading this. Every thought you think, every idea that enters your mind, every perspective you hold has been carefully curated by forces you don't even recognize. Your consciousness, the very thing you believe to be most intimately your own, is actually a battlefield where invisible armies fight for territory, and you have been unconsciously choosing sides without even knowing a war was taking place. Machiavelli wrote, "The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. In your case, replace ruler with your consciousness, and men with every influence that shapes your thinking. Every book you read, every conversation you have, every piece of media you consume, every person you follow on social platforms, they are not neutral inputs. They are active agents reshaping your neural pathways, your emotional responses, your very capacity for independent thought. This is where the focus crisis reveals its deepest dimension. You are not just struggling to concentrate, you are losing the ability to distinguish between your own authentic thoughts and the thoughts that have been planted in your mind by others. When you cannot sustain attention long enough to think deeply and independently, you become intellectually dependent on external sources to do your thinking for you. You mistake the echo chamber of popular opinion for wisdom, the noise of constant commentary for insight. Machiavelli practiced what might be the most radical discipline of all, the conscious curation of intellectual influence. He understood that exposure to inferior minds would make him intellectually inferior, that consuming shallow content would make his thoughts shallow, that surrounding himself with reactive people would make him reactive. So he made a choice that seems almost impossible in our hyper-connected age. He became ruthlessly selective about what thoughts he allowed into his consciousness. This is not about building echo chambers or avoiding different perspectives. It is about recognizing that your mind is not a democracy where every voice deserves equal representation. It is a monarchy, and you are the sovereign who decides which voices deserve a place in your inner court. Machiavelli would spend 90% of his mental energy engaging with the greatest minds in history through their writings, and only 10% exposing himself to contemporary chaos. This ratio allowed him to think clearly in a world of confusion, to see patterns others missed, to maintain perspective when others lost theirs. Consider the profound implications. What if your inability to focus is not just a personal weakness, but a symptom of intellectual contamination? What if the scattered, reactive quality of your thoughts reflects the scattered, reactive quality of the information environment you inhabit? What if the solution is not just to focus better on whatever thoughts arise, but to become absolutely ruthless about which thoughts you allow to arise in the first place? This leads to the most disturbing realization of all. In our age of infinite information, The most dangerous illusion is the belief that consuming more content will make you smarter, more informed, more capable. The opposite is true. In a world of information overload, intelligence is not about processing more inputs. It is about developing the wisdom to ignore almost everything and focus with laser intensity on the few sources of genuine insight that can actually upgrade your thinking. Machiavelli would look at the modern person scrolling through social media feeds, jumping between news articles, consuming podcasts while walking, listening to audiobooks while exercising, and he would see not someone who is well-informed, but someone who has lost the capacity for original thought entirely. He would see a mind so overstimulated, so constantly flooded with external inputs, that it can no longer generate its own insights. The final revelation is this: true focus is not about learning to concentrate on whatever task is in front of you. True focus is about developing such clarity about what deserves your attention that everything else becomes invisible. It is about reaching a level of intellectual sovereignty where your thoughts are so powerfully your own that external distractions simply bounce off your consciousness like raindrops off armor. When you master controlled exposure, something extraordinary happens. You begin to think thoughts that feel different, cleaner, more precise, more powerful. Ideas emerge from silence rather than noise. Solutions appear through contemplation rather than research. You start to recognize the difference between authentic insight and recycled opinion, between original thought and intellectual infection. The people around you will notice this transformation, but they won't understand it. They will wonder why you seem so calm while they feel frantic, why your decisions seem so clear while theirs feel confused, why you appear to have access to some source of certainty they cannot find. They will ask you how you do it, and you will realize that you have become what Machiavelli always intended to create: a sovereign mind in a world of mental subjects. But here is the final paradox, the truth that makes everything else possible. This sovereignty is not something you achieve. It is something you reclaim. Beneath all the noise, all the distraction, all the mental chaos, your true nature already exists. It is not weak or scattered or confused. It is precise, powerful, and absolutely clear about what matters most. Your focus was never broken. It was buried. Your attention was never deficient. It was hijacked. Your mind was never inadequate. It was colonized. The method of Machiavelli is not about learning something new. It is about remembering something ancient. It is about returning to the natural state of human consciousness before it was fragmented by the machinery of distraction. It is about reclaiming the birthright of every human being, the ability to think clearly, choose deliberately, and act with the full force of concentrated will. The war for your attention is not a metaphor. It is the defining struggle of our time. And like all wars, it will be won not by the side with the most resources, but by the side with the most discipline, the clearest strategy, and the absolute refusal to surrender. The question that will determine everything is simple. Will you rule your mind like a prince rules his kingdom? Or will you allow it to be ruled by forces that see your consciousness not as sacred territory, but as conquered land to be exploited? Your answer to that question will shape not just your focus, but the entire trajectory of your existence. Choose wisely. Choose now. Choose like Machiavelli would choose, with the full weight of eternity behind every decision.